Hello, music educators. I'd like to start by thanking the organising committee for affording me the honour of making this address. It is a real privilege, and developing it has been a most rewarding, not to say nostalgic, process. For someone whose entire working life involved music education, and it still does, although I retired some time ago, there's been precious little in the way of formal training. Rather, a series of encounters with people, most of them unplanned, at least by me. That's why I've given this presentation the title Serendipitous Music Education. I was born at a time when home entertainments, and for that matter activities for children outside the home, were pretty limited. But everything I participated in involved singing. How blessed was I. Dad had been a good amateur singer in his day, and Mum played the piano a bit, so there was a piano in the house and music was accepted as a normal pastime. There was, of course, no TV and no record player, but my earliest memories involved listening to the radio, Kindergarten of the Air, the Village Glee Club and the Mobile Aria. We participated in Caledonian Society activities, notably the annual ball, so I learnt some Scottish country dances. I was a brownie and then a guide, and in both of these, singing was part of weekly meetings, hikes and camps. Both my sister and I were sent to Sunday school from about 5 years of age. We sang a lot at junior Sunday school at the big Anglican church in Launceston, mostly ditties, many of which I can still sing, but won't, you'll be glad to know. Hear the pennies dropping, Jesus loves me, and happy, happy birthday. Alongside this, I went to Christian Endeavour at the local Baptist church where my best friend Jennifer's family were prominent members. There we sang hymns and choruses of personal redemption, what are now called Pentecostal, quite different from St. John's. I know a lot of hymns. Things changed when I was old enough for senior Sunday school. I was about 10, I think. The church had a very good pipe organ and an excellent organist, Lindsay, who played for the hymns we learned. Lindsay had no truck with children's hymns. For the annual Sunday school anniversary, which meant lots of hymns, as well as book prizes and a new dress, he trawled Common Praise for the best it had to offer, including some that are fixed in my memory, although I've never sung them since, despite umpteen years of cathedral and church choir membership. Here's an example. Hills of the north rejoice, echoing songs arise. Hail with united voice him who made earth and skies. He comes in righteousness and love. He brings salvation from above. Lindsay believed that people of any age were entitled to know the huge repertoire of hymns that were, and are, good of their kind. By this, he meant good poetry and strong tunes appropriate for the occasion, with music that enhances the sense of the text. It was a lesson I learned well and has stood me in good stead throughout my life. Lindsay was my first real musical influence, and I owe much to his integrity, generosity and musicianship. My primary school didn't have a choir, but from about grade 3 we had weekly singing with a visiting teacher who played the piano and taught us, I suspect, all the songs I've always known but don't remember learning. There was a strong emphasis on English folk songs such as Lincolnshire Poacher, Cherry Ripe, Do You Ken John Peel, the repertoire from the National Songbook, as I discovered subsequently when I acquired a copy, and I still have it. In grades 5 and 6, though, we also had weekly country dancing lessons. I wish I could remember the name of the lady who taught us. A good 50 to 60 kids all on her own, and she both taught the dances and played the piano for them. Squares for 4, set dances, circle dances such as Butterfly, If All the World Were Paper, Hunsdon House, Brighton Camp, Gallopede and Circassian Circle. With my teacher hat on, I salute her profoundly. It's through her that it was imprinted on me that the movement patterns match the musical structure and the music tells you what to do. With the Scottish dancing reinforcement from home, it's no wonder that I've never had a problem with hearing elements of musical form. When I went to Launceston High School, which in those days was a selective academic school, no such thing as comprehensives then, music was one of my electives from start to finish. It was music appreciation, no performance component, but very solid history and theory. I found theory easy, including 4-part vocal harmony and figured bass realisation, although I had no idea what it sounded like until Ted, our teacher, played it. It's also where I first joined a choir which I absolutely loved. All girls, although it was a mixed school. It was all by rote. Photocopiers didn't exist and there was no thought of purchasing multiple copies. The choir was a very high standard, I believe, with an excellent Eisteddfod record. I only wish my memorisation skills now were what they were then. Having introduced me to the joys of choral singing, it was Ted who provided my first chance to sing with an SATB choir. In the year after I matriculated, while hanging around in Launceston waiting to turn 17 so I could go to university, he put together an old scholars choir to mark the 50th anniversary of the school. Of course I went along, by a long way the youngest of the assembled company, but no matter. Singing from music with experienced adults. We sang "And the Glory of the Lord" and the Hallelujah chorus. I'd never followed music before, had no idea how they did it, but I was swept up in the whole thing, and with the help of those around me I coped, and I've sung in mixed choirs ever since, but never by rote. My time at the University of Tasmania was a hugely significant one in my musical development. I joined the University Choral Society, then called TUX, and in my first year we did Iolanthe from the enormous Gilbert and Sullivan repertoire, of course, then Beethoven Mass in C at Adelaide InterVarsity, plus a Hassler something or other. It was my first opportunity to sing major works, something that's still going on almost 60 years later. I found I could read music reasonably well, that all the theory I'd done made perfect sense of the dots. Rex, lecturer in music and conductor of the choir, discovered I could write manuscript quickly and accurately and asked me about my background. In 1964, my second year, the School of Music was established at uni for the purpose of training music teachers. It eventually became the Conservatorium with a much broader program, but the education strand was continued in the 4-year degree for well over 30 years until a combination of budgetary issues and university politics saw it transferred to the Faculty of Education. Possibly because of what Rex knew of me, he facilitated a course switch for me to include Music 1 and 2 as part of my arts degree, as well as sitting in on some School of Music classes, which meant I got to know the first couple of groups of music teachers to be trained in Tasmania. His only proviso was that I had to play a Mozart sonata by the end of the year, so off I went to the only music lessons I've ever had, 18 months of piano. Towards the end of my first year, one of the Tux basses asked me if I would be interested in joining St David's Cathedral Choir and took me to a rehearsal. This is the start of the first piece I rehearsed with the choir. After the first 3 chords that the choir sings, I was hooked. I sang there for a good 15 years under the direction of choirmaster John and in the company of Ian, the bass who'd invited me to join. It made me a useful sight reader. You had to be to cope with a big repertoire and minimal rehearsal time. Sacred choral music was to become an abiding passion, with years of RECM summer schools all over Australia and a couple in England, with some marvellous directors including Sir David Wilcox and John Rutter. By the end of my first year at uni, I was Tux secretary. This had unexpected long-term outcomes. Tuck stepped in to bring Musica Viva groups to Tasmania, starting with the Della Consort, and did so until Friends of Music took over the role. Going to concerts by those international groups sparked my love of chamber music, which continues to this day. It is as much about observing the interaction between the musicians as it is the music itself, I find. I have had a long involvement with Musica Viva Australia and serve on the National Members Council. If I had to choose between choral and chamber music, I'd agonise. A few years into my teaching life, the fresh-faced Gray was appointed to work with me, a very young graduate. I think he was 19. At his suggestion, we invested in some guitars. When they arrived, he insisted I teach guitar because he was teaching brass. Starting a school concert band was also his idea. I had to conduct because Gray was playing. I also had to learn to read a score, fingering for all the wind and brass instruments in the band, and transpositions and clefs. This was absolutely invaluable. I formed or continued bands in all the high schools I taught at from then on, plus some work with community bands. And when I found myself as the sole music teacher in the school, teaching all the instruments, I was even more appreciative of Gray's insistence. It's not only musicians who have played a part in my development. Principals and other senior officers are critical in establishing a school's culture. At Penguin High School, founding Principal Graham demonstrated this par excellence. There was a clear expectation of high levels of professionalism and accountability, with the requirement that staff provide educational justification for actions, particularly changes, all within a hugely supportive, not threatening environment. When I heard about an Australian Music Education Lecturers Conference in Melbourne, it was Graham who gave me permission to attend and secured transfer of duty for me to do so. It's where I first met and learned of the work of Keith Swanwick from the University of London Institute of Education. It was Keith's work, particularly his book A Basis for Music Education, that led to my interest in curriculum and syllabus thinking, development and documentation. I found John Painter's book, Music in the Secondary School Curriculum, the documentation of an enormous project run by him from York University, in the trade display at that conference. These two publications, and of course their authors, had a profound effect on music curricula in the UK and a little later in Australia. By that time, my good friend Amanda, part of the first intake of the School of Music, was teaching at UTAS, at both the Con and the School of Education. Being vocal about the tiredness of the existing syllabus and its proposed revision, saw me appointed to the School's Board Music Subject Committee. Amanda was another member of the Subject Committee, which is where she discovered my interest in and knowledge of contemporary developments in music curriculum. We ended up going to York together for the spring term of 1989 to work with John Painter, undertaking a graduate certificate in music education. Everyone we wanted to meet thought the sun shone out of John and either invited us to visit or came to York to work with us. It was a richly rewarding time, which led me eventually to work in the curriculum section of the Education Department and lecturing in music education. Penguin High School was also where I first got involved with primary schools. In the middle of my time there, David was appointed to Penguin Primary as a specialist music teacher. There was not quite a full load for him, so he spent one day a week at the high school teaching brass notionally, but actually working collegially on whatever was timetabled. We formed a splendid mutually supportive partnership, and before long I got interested in what he was doing in the primary school. I asked for much of my non-contact time to be bundled to one afternoon a week. He put all three of the grade 5-6 classes on then, back to back, and I drove down the hill each Wednesday lunchtime to spend the afternoon learning about the work of specialist primary music teachers. We established a true K10 model. What the children had been doing in grade 6 just continued with the addition of instrumental tuition in year 7. From 1991 onwards, I stopped being totally school-based. I worked part-time with Amanda at UTAS, then won the position of Tasmania Manager of the Musica Viva in Schools program and TSO Education Officer for a time. My Department of Education non-school-based was in curriculum, so I worked alongside the Principal Curriculum Officer for the Arts, Frank, whom I'd first met when he was a treble in St David's Choir. Anything with music in its name landed on my desk, and eventually included the combined primary choir and responsibility for the music component during the Arts Priority Triennium, which produced an enormous amount of very fine teacher resource material, now sadly disappeared into the DOE black hole called at the time the E-Centre. There was continuing involvement with the Schools Board, which changed its name several times, as is often the way with government entities, in syllabus development and pre-tertiary external examining. I undertook additional work for Musica Viva in schools in resource development and aligning material with various curricula as they came and went, plus some involvement in primary classroom publications by Bushfire Press. I met and worked with some of the best primary music specialists in the country at the time. It became more and more difficult to combine school-based work with the other, as schools wanted me there on particular days, and my other work was statewide and needed travel. Eventually, I moved out of schools and sideways into beginning teacher support in relation to registration requirements and similar work, along with arts curriculum. The development of the Tasmanian curriculum in the late 1990s required an extensive consultation process, which produced a lot of material that had to be organised and given succinctness. My job was music and visual art. Frank did drama, dance and media. It's the only music education curriculum statement of which the late Richard Gill AO approved, and I'm still chuffed about that. With changing political imperatives and shrinking budgets, I moved to part-time and eventually retired in, I think, 2010. Outside of work commitments, choirs persisted. During my Penguin High years, I sang with Don Corral in Devonport and directed St John's Church Choir. Since my return to Hobart post-York, there have been various occasional choirs and later TSO chorus, of which I am still a member. That provided, and still does, the greatly cherished opportunity to work with first-rate conductors. Above all, they expect from the chorus the same level of commitment as is evident with members of the orchestra. That smartens up your ideas, I can tell you. I have learned from all our conductors. To my mind, there are three groups. The B list, who talk about themselves, the A list, who talk about the music, and the A+ list, who have ways of sharing their insight into the meaning of the music. There have been one or two who haven't made it onto any list, but they won't get a return gig, so they don't matter. In the late 1990s, I joined Cygnet Singers. I was living in the Huon Valley by then. And in 2001, I was invited to become musical director of the choir, a position I still hold and deeply treasure. More about that in a bit. When the Hobart-based chamber choir Allegri Ensemble was formed, I was invited to join the group and am still a member. With first Andrew and now Jonathan as directors, the standard is high and the repertoire very demanding. I have to work really hard. I can't sight read most of it, and that's the joy. I go to lots of concerts, well over 100 in a normal year, orchestral and chamber music for the most part. Mostly they're with professional players and singers. I do go to a handful of amateur events, generally because I have some sort of relationship with the organisation that's putting them on. I am not attracted to anything that's amplified, although I do make exceptions for the Wharf Review and the idea of North. That's my choice, and I know I'm privileged to be able to make it. I love the degree of physicality, the way the player relates to the instrument. It's practically visceral. It's very clear that they love their instruments, they love what they're doing, and they're 100% committed to it, from the soles of their feet to the tops of their heads. The visual element of live performance is critical. I love watching that kinetic component, and there is nothing like sharing the vibrations, being in the same airspace. I learned something new about music and musicians from every concert. I think the common factors among those people who have played a part in my development are integrity and passion. They believe in doing their job as well as they possibly can, and they honour the integrity of the music they work with, making their interpretation as close as they can get to what they perceive to be the composer's intention. That's what I hope has become part of the way I work today. My main teaching activity now is working with my choir. We all know very well that rehearsals equals teaching if you're the director. I dabble in other bits and pieces, resources development for TSO education, some organisation stuff with Festival of Voices, and a bit of rehearsing of community choirs thrown in. but the focus of my attention is Cygnet Singers, a non-audition community choir in the Huon Valley. We have some advantages. The Huon Valley is a discrete geographical region which identifies itself as a community. So we are a community choir within a true community in the way that a choir which operates within an urban area really can't be. Once you get over Vincer-Saddle, you're in a separate place. What's more, it's an attractive region for tree changers, many of whom have strong interest in the arts. Within Cygnet Singers, there are retired instrumental professionals and music teachers, along with a good number of experienced singers who read well. They are balanced by people who've never sung in their lives or not since school and will tell you they can't read music. We have a membership of close to 70, of whom a good 90% are retirees. We do birthdays, but not ages. So I can't be sure, but to the best of my knowledge, we have a couple of youngsters nudging 50 and certainly a handful in their 90s. They turn up because they think they'd like to sing. They keep coming because they love being in the choir. There are some guiding principles that inform teaching in any situation. I was very interested in an article in May last year written by a vet teacher during the COVID-19 lockdown and the consequent reliance on online and homeschooling. To paraphrase, relationships are critical to learning. Learning is best done with people, not for them. Learners are participants, not recipients. Sharing ideas and knowledge between teacher and student builds in independence so that learning becomes a self-managed activity. People need to be seen and recognised for who they are, where they come from, and what they achieve. Teachers need to create a sense of comfort and reassurance that students can learn and progress. I believe those points to be true, and I hope I put them into practice. We work very hard at being a choir community as well as a community choir. Well-being comes first. Members can walk away anytime they like. Those who stay do so because in addition to enjoying the music, they feel welcome, they feel that they belong, they feel valued, and they are. We run a system of contact groups managed by a member who is a retired psychologist with group leaders whose job it is to know why anyone in their group is missing. Unexpected absences mean a phone call telling them they've been missed and asking if things are okay. Our group leaders did sterling work during last year's lockdown, maintaining contact every week with their singers. We always knew how each and every one of our members was coping. The weekly phone call was a bright spot in the week for the many who live alone. The music is the reason they come along. They like working hard, they like learning, they're experienced learners and they know when their brains are being stretched and they enjoy that. They love the feeling that comes from doing something you didn't know you could. There's no such thing as too old to learn, not in our choir, that's for sure. It's a very safe environment where it's fine to get things wrong. Making mistakes just gives everyone a chance to have a really good look, listen and think, and probably a few laughs. We sing lots of short pieces with a deliberate mixture of the technically easy and more challenging, and of a huge variety, demanding frequent switching of mood and style. In the front of my mind always is the notion that composition is intentional, the outcome of a huge number of deliberate choices. In any work, the way the various elements of music interact, connect, sequence and so on are all governed by the composer's expressive purpose. When it's vocal music, that purpose is clear. The music is there to enhance the meaning of the words. Without that, there's no point. From the first introduction of a new piece, we pay attention to the text and what it means. Our goal is to communicate that meaning to our eventual audience. It is not my intention to downplay focus, discipline, formal tuition, rigorous assessment through evidence-based outcomes, and high levels of accountability on the path of both student and teacher. I've been involved in both roles and recognise the merits. Neither would I speak against any kind of on-job training and development, whatever form that may take. I have had privileged access to the thinking and in some cases the classrooms of many teachers and greatly esteem the thoughtful and meticulous preparation, delivery and record keeping I have observed. I've attended countless workshops, summer schools, festivals, conferences, including ASME and ANCOS, and have learned from all of them. I think good practice in teaching is grounded in a combination of ethics, skill, passion, and intention to communicate, and the ability to understand and adapt to the particular set of circumstances in which you find yourself. A point that I hope to make today is that best practice may well be found in situations that are not explicitly intended as educational, and their informality or the happy accidents that place us in them in no way detracts from their contribution to our ongoing learning. I am sure that on reflection we can all think of people and occasions outside of recognised training or approved professional learning that have played a very significant part in our musical growth. In this address, I have traced my own development through a series of such encounters. As a retired educator, I find this encouraging. It spreads the load. I think of the thousands of students I've worked with and the 90% of them at a guest to whom I made very little difference. There will be other opportunities for them as there were for me. So thank you everyone from Lindsay to Jonathan and others I haven't mentioned who has been part of my musical development. To use a nutrition analogy appropriate to this conference, my encounters have been nutritionally dense, almost completely devoid of empty calories. I have indeed been nourished by serendipitous circumstances throughout my life. My aim now is to take my place in the continuum, to try to bring nourishment to others. Thank you.